Good evening. This is a called meeting of the Board of Adjustments of the City of Sunset Valley on Wednesday, March the 2nd, 2022. I will now call the board in session. We have before us an agenda with two applications for variances. And my first request to the board is that no one disqualified based on any types of conflicts of interest with these variances. Okay, let the record show that we have no recusals or disqualifications. So let's take a look at our agenda. Citizen public comments in general. We have none. Approval of the minutes from the 15th of September are before the board.
I move approval of the minutes from September 15, 2021.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from the September 15th, 2021 meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Let the vote show, all concurred. The minutes are approved. Now we begin first with our variance request at 11 Sunset Trail. Deals with the encroachment of an accessory structure, a shed, into the 25-yard setback. The way we'll do this is we'll allow the applicant to present their case, and then I'll call on those who support the application. Then the chair shall call on those who are opposed to the application, and then those that are proposing the application have the right of rebuttal. After that is done, we'll then close the time for public comment. So the presentation on the application by the applicant is 10 minutes. Opponents and supporters have a total of 3 minutes, and then the applicant at the end can have 5 minutes. So public comment, the applicant for the variance. Hi.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Veronica Vargas. I am the homeowner at 11 Sunset Trail. And the variance that I'm requesting is because my new shed is encroaching the easement. I have 2 corners that are encroaching. One, I believe, is a total of 6 feet, and the other one, 4 feet on the top corner. When I originally purchased this property, it had 3 different sheds. They all were on concrete. Throughout the one side of the property, there were both 2 on the left side, right at the property line, and 1 on the right side, right at the property line. Those sheds had been removed entirely. In place, I put this one. This shed doesn't have any concrete at the bottom. It's on studs, so it doesn't have, water can flow freely. There is no issues there, and it was a misunderstanding and ignorance on my part not to properly read the setbacks in this particular case. I don't know if there's anything in particular that you like to ask.
We'll ask questions after, as we get towards the end here. So thank you very much. Do I have any people that would like to speak in support of this variance?
Chair, are we not?
Yeah, do I have anyone that wants to speak in opposition to this variance? Okay, there are none.
I'd like to point out, so a neighbor, their neighbor
okay.
left a comment on Open Town Hall. If the board would like me to read, and I apologize, I meant to print it for you all, but Sylvia can pull it up on the screen. Would you like me to read it?
Please.
Okay. From Joe Laban, statement regarding 11 Sunset. I live next door at 13 Sunset and have viewed the structure in question, 11 Sunset. It is a small, newly constructed shed built to replace at least 2 older sheds that were much closer to the property line. In addition to removing multiple structures from the backyard, the homeowner has removed multiple carports, cleared dead debris and overgrowth, installed new fencing, and in general, in my opinion, worked very hard to improve the overall property. This has increased the value of her property, the surrounding properties, and the city. It also provides a tidier look to the neighborhood. I think that the reason the city is aware of the structure in question is because the homeowner has had city officials out to the property to consult on other projects. I believe that the homeowner is acting in good faith to revitalize the property, taking into consideration city ordinances, and that this was merely an unfortunate oversight. Apologies for not being able to attend in person, but feel free to call me with any additional questions if needed. Regards, Joe Laban, 13 Sunset Trail.
Okay, thank you very much.
There were no other written comments
Okay.
or emails received.
So if we have no other comments, we'll call the open hearing closed, and now the board has an opportunity to ask questions of both the applicant and the city staff.
Chair, I guess my question to you was, do we not require the applicant to show that they've met or are we going to do that via questioning? Okay,
We'll do
thank
that
you.
via questioning.
All right, then I guess I'd like to hear from the city staff on how they view this as meeting the required findings. And also, I gather that in addition to this encroaching on the setback, it also was not permitted?
Correct. And so, and again, Carolyn Meredith the Public Works Director has been working with the applicant. She couldn't be at the meeting, but she did brief me. So yes, in order to get the shed permitted and to come into compliance with city code, we knew that this was going to trigger a variance application with the Board of Adjustment. So that's why it's here before you. The shed does meet the other requirements for accessory structures. No other variance is needed. I believe the map that was included in the applicant's letter, it does show that older sheds were removed. Currently, this is the only actual accessory structure on the property. There is a pool on the property, and what used to be a carport, a detached carport, is now just a concrete pad. So the only zoning issue is that the shed, and it is currently there, and it is currently encroaching into the side yard setback, and so this variance would allow that essentially.
So the board will call Susan. Is there anything else you want to ask on that?
Yes, so one of the requirements is that they show special circumstances exist that will cause significant practical difficulties to the applicant, and pecuniary hardship alone does not constitute practical hardship, and yet the response to that was that it's costly and unreasonable. You can't argue that as something is unreasonable in as a reason why it's not reasonable. And so the costly in and of itself speaks exactly to the language that says pecuniary hardship alone does not constitute practical hardship. So what practical hardship was found by staff to move this forward?
Hopefully I can answer that through information gathered as the case was developed. Mrs. Vargas had impervious cover issues, and as she was removing, she's correct, staff was on site. Carolyn visited the site on a number of occasions. This was not an issue that was raised at the time. There was some discussion of the shed, and I believe it was both a staff resident issue where this was really truly just missed. The fact that the shed went up without a permit, that's not something we can defend.
Are you saying that staff also failed to advise the resident that they needed a permit?
We failed to advise of setbacks, and we failed to advise of permit because we were not aware at that time there was a shed that was going to, or there was a plan. What we knew was there were things coming out because impervious cover was already at a maximum, and there were improvements she was trying to do, and things needed to come out in order for her to be able to do those improvements, namely a pool, I believe. So most of the discussion always centered around impervious cover. The shed was a surprise, but as we visited the site, I believe there was probably more discussion we could have had from a staffing level as to what can or can't go on the site, considering that she was a new resident.
Sylvia?
Richard?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sylvia, so when someone's requesting to build a pool or to build something else on their property, my recollection is you have to provide the city with a survey or at least a line drawing of what you plan to do, and you have to show the setbacks on there. So didn't the applicant know there were setbacks? I mean, I don't understand if she's got projects going on, it seems like the setbacks should have been visible to you and to her before this got going.
Correct, but again, we were dealing with a different project on her site. We weren't even looking at the shed. We were looking at improvements and pulling out existing driveway, pulling out existing concrete, being able to create vegetative filter strips, not looking anywhere near the shed. And from my perspective, the conversation is perhaps a better education by us. If we want to take some of the responsibility, that is the part that I would take.
Also, if I may, there was a shed at the location just farther back to the property line. And initially, when I started doing the construction or removing debris and that sort of thing, I asked for permission, like to remove a dead tree. I asked for permission to rebuild my fence in the back to Westgate. And they told me that if I was replacing something existing, that I did not have to have a permit at that point. So it was, again, my ignorance. I thought I'm replacing a shed that was already there. So I built it just a little bit farther away from the fence line, just because that's how I designed it.
Part of the conversation I'm not aware of, because I'm not aware of any shed discussions. If you look at the site plan, there were structures already encroaching into the setback. But as we talk about remodel and we talk about the 50% rule, which you're aware, anything beyond 50% kicks you into now being in compliance. And so I'm not aware of her conversation with staff regarding if it's there, you can rebuild it as it's there. But the fence doesn't require a permit, but anything else on the site would.
And just to clarify, that's not exactly correct. Just if it's there, you can't rebuild it where it was necessarily.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm saying that
Correct.
because I want anyone listening
Correct.
to understand that that's inaccurate.
Correct.
And it, you know.
And that's
it's
the
very
50%
disappointing.
rule. That's the 50% rule I refer to, because she's rebuilding it completely. It needs to come into compliance, and that includes setbacks.
So I want to clarify what, is it my turn? Can I talk now? I'm red. So if you have a structure that you want to restore, let's say, repair, you can remake up to 50% of it without getting a permit.
Not without getting a permit. Not without getting a permit. There's still some requirements for permitting, especially if you're touching electrical and plumbing and those kinds of things, even the roofing to an extent. And the 50% is applicable to the site. And so she'd already done significant remodel and work on the front portion of the house. What did you added a?
I removed some concrete, or I don't even know if it's concrete, but I removed concrete, removed debris, removed cover porch. I had like 3 of those removed from old fencing. So I did a lot of stuff and then kind of replaced it with my driveway was what Matt, I believe is his name, was referring to, where the carport was, is just now part of the driveway. So stones, zero-scape sort of thing.
And I'm asking that question just so I understand the rules,
So-
not really pertaining to that case in particular, but the 50% rule is you can rebuild something there as long as you're not touching electrical, water. You can put a new roof on your shed and aren't required to get a,
If it's existing non-conforming and you're just doing repairs, yes, you can put a new roof on the shed.
okay. Second question, the shed she built, I don't know how many square feet it is, a couple of hundred something, do you know?
The
But our,
exact measurements, but I think it's less than
if she was
200.
there's a limit on a shed that you don't require a permit for, but this is over that limit? Is that true? Isn't there like you can build a shed that's below a certain limit without a permit? Or all sheds require a permit?
Matt's going to look that up. It typically depends on the jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions that have windstorm, for example, don't allow anything over 100 square feet before windstorm is kicked. Some jurisdictions who are not in a coastal county can do 200 square feet. So it depends on your jurisdiction.
yeah,
Matt is checking our code right now.
Yeah, I'm just worried about Sunset Valley. But you guys feel for this shed, she was supposed to get a permit?
Yes.
Okay. So now I got a question for the applicant. You said the shed is not on concrete.
No, some piers.
Is it basically a shed on skids that can be slid and moved?
And it can. The problem that I'm having with that is that it will wind up being in the middle of my gate going to the backyard. So now I'm having to redo all of that. I will have to redo my fencing, my gates, and maybe even part of my driveway to kind of scoot it over to actually lined up, kind of the way that it was intended to be initially.
Okay. When you said it wasn't on concrete, I just wanted to clarify.
yeah.
It is something, because you could have built a pole barn that you couldn't move, but this one can be moved.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
And that's an interesting point, Commissioner, that as we had been talking through impervious cover, the discussion was water needs to be able to flow through. And so hence, I think the skid mounted shed, so some cognizance of some part of the code, but that was just the water portion of it, because that's all we had been talking about to that point was impervious cover.
I thought there was a restriction on the size of a structure if you were going to let water flow under it. I thought that also had a size restriction.
So it's 1,500 square feet, no more than 1,000 per structure. You can have 3. One of them can't be bigger than 1,000. The cumulative total can't be more than 1,500.
So I understand that for total accessory structures, but I thought there was also a separate section about structures that allowed water to flow under them. Because the 1,500 feet, that can be concrete or it can be on stilts or anything. It can be any way you wanted to do it. But I thought there was some peculiarity in our code about structures that did allow water to flow under them. That you got a special benefit of something, but it was only up to a certain size.
If the water's flowing through it, it doesn't count toward your impervious cover. Here recently, we have, I believe it was in the November timeframe, we have granted additional relief to homeowners for certain sizes of things. I can bring that particular item up, but it's a percentage of your total lot.
So, again, this
And
is just for
that's just impervious cover.
It's just for my education again. So if somebody wants to build a 500 square foot structure on their property, they've got the rules for the number of structures they can have and the total square foot of those structures, but they may also be close to an impervious cover limit, and if they put it on stilts, then they get by that part of it.
Correct, so long as they
Okay.
match the other portion, and then so long as the structure itself is properly permitted, if it's going to have.
Okay. And I'm sorry to drag you through.
No,
this.
no, no,
I
no,
just
that's
want to
okay,
get
that's
clear
okay.
in my mind what the rules are, because we don't hear all this all the time.
Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Sylvia, but I don't feel like there was an answer to my question about the requirement of hardship, and the only statement being that it was pecuniary. So is there something other than pecuniary that I can?
No, other than the cost for her to
So-
move the shed out of
So then how is she going to meet the
setback.
first standard?
I have when we get into board discussion, I am in the same situation. I have an answer for that.
Okay.
Sure. Okay, great. I live on the same street. Walked over to see the shed. Every single house on that street that is part of the Flournoy development has exactly the same configuration. There was a shed built at the top of the driveway, almost over to the fence line. My shed is right on the fence line, totally out of compliance. I am grandfathered in because it was there from the way back beginning, and I have taken advantage of the rebuild. Would have been much better if I could have moved my shed over. But again, because of all the restrictions, I did not. I chose the other option. There is literally no way she could get in her backyard if she has to move the shed over. I could not get in my backyard if I had to move the shed over. The way they're all constructed is that shed was at the top and over to the side of the driveway. There's also not enough space on the other side of the house to meet the setback requirements. And all of the houses on that street are exactly the same. The house on the far side is too close to the setback to allow for a shed to not be. The only other thing we could do would be to put shed in the middle of the backyard. And it's not money or an issue with that. It's just simply access. She couldn't have access to her backyard for maintenance, service, anything else. Because the shed, by moving the shed over to meet the setback requirement, it totally blocks access.
So I hear what you're saying, and I understand that they were all grandfathered, which is why the others were where they were.
Permitted
and
where
this
they were,
one,
right.
That's why it was there, but I'm looking at the drawing that was provided to us, and I see that there is space further back from that gate. So are you saying that, I realize maybe it would be a problem if she just moved it completely
She moved it within, if she
right.
moved it within the setback, it would be, it doesn't matter whether it's further back or closer to the top of the driveway, it would still be in the middle of her backyard.
So if she moved it back here, according to this drawing, that would still create the same issue that you're talking about?
Okay, so this is the old one.
Right,
So she can't do that because she's in the setback.
This is set back here?
Yeah,
I thought this red one was the new one.
it is. The red one's the new one. But if she moves it back that way, if she just brings it straight back, she's still in the setback.
She's in the back setback.
She still needs this variance.
Okay.
I think we would have, had she had the information about needing to permit the shed, we would still have to have had to, an application for a setback regardless, because that's the only reasonable place for her to put the shed.
Good information, thank you.
For the board, do we have any other questions for the applicant or the city? Seeing none of those questions, I would ask for a motion from the board.
I move we approve the variance to the setback requirement for the shed, to allow the shed to encroach 7 feet in the front and 4 feet in the rear of the setback distance.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? I'll second the motion to bring it to discussion.
Okay.
I'd like to offer a friendly amendment. I would like to offer an amendment to approve the setback as presented in its current location, and that, as always, this be part of the requirements of this property, and it can't be changed without further action, and that we make a finding that the board finds each of these 10 items that we are required to find in order to approve this variance.
I'll accept that.
Thank you.
So we have an acceptance on the friendly amendment, and the motion's been seconded. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the variance passes. Okay, on to our second variance request.
I just want to say thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Sure. So our second variance request deals with a property at 6405 Brodie Lane. The question being, again, a variance in terms of landscape buffer on the property. So we'll follow the same process as we had for the first variance. We'll ask that, first of all, we have the applicant, come forward and do their presentation, and remind you again that you have 10 minutes to do
Chair, may
Sure.
I
Yes, ma'am.
interject?
Sure, go for it.
We received information earlier today of the sad passing of Mrs. Galt.
Correct.
And my understanding that with the death of Mrs. Galt, her property is going to become parkland. And the only reason for this variance was the fact that Mrs. Galt's homestead was still zoned single-family residence. There's nothing preventing them from moving forward with the zoning for parkland. Therefore, I think this action is either moot or premature, and I recommend that we table it rather than hear it, because I don't see the point in us granting a variance when the unfortunate fact of her death has moved this to a different set of circumstances.
Okay, let's have that open comments from the city and then from the other board members.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that comment. We thought the same thing, that it would be cured as we went through the future rezoning of the Galt property. Two things complicate that matter. One is we are in the process of going through a Parks and Open Space master plan, so we will essentially not be doing anything with parks and open space until that plan is complete. I'm not sure how long that plan is going to take. The second thing is, as you're aware, there's no guarantee that any rezoning is going to happen or be approved. So that was the two issues of concern. The Parks and Open Space Master Plan is taking an inventory of all of the property within the city. That is one of the things it's going to do. The other thing is going to be what is the best use for each of those properties, and discussion of a conservation land or park land. So there's still some work to be done in that area, and we have absolutely no idea when that is going to be brought forward for rezoning.
So you just mentioned that we don't know when zoning might happen. My understanding was that this was already a situation where upon her death, it was going to be parkland. There's not any action that I'm aware of. So does someone have to vote on that?
Yes, it still needs to go through the rezoning process. It is still zoned single-family residential. It was not rezoned at the time that the life estate was created.
And what does our working on the parks, or whatever it was, green space that you talked about, how does that change the impact of the buffer zone? Y'all might be changing buffer zones?
I don't know what's going to happen as a result of the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. Have no clue. And so essentially, until that's done, I won't have an idea of is there going to be a buffer requirement? Is there not? What is that buffer requirement going to be? Additionally, we're looking at the we're looking at the land development code as well, which may change requirements.
It may change, but until it's changed, it's changed. And, I mean, it is what it is. So I don't understand what a future change might have on a current decision.
And I'd like to add, how can you violate a life estate, I mean, an estate that's already been approved? She sold the property with the understanding that it would convert to parkland. I don't see how you can violate that sales agreement.
Well,
I'll
those
let
are
the
two
attorney
different
chime
things.
in, but you still have to go through the legislative process to make that change. So, Barb,
Well, we're actually talking about two different things, right? Okay, we have Ms. Dunn, whose property is not the parkland, right? That's the Grubbs, sorry, that they're putting the, they want to put the eatery on. And then we have Ms. Galt, who passed away, and I understood that she had already granted the city the parkland designation for her property upon her death. Am I getting that incorrect?
so the designation came from, we acquired that property using green tax, using venue funds, with the belief that it was going to be zoned parks. The rezoning has not occurred. That's the intention, that we go through that process, but that legislative process has not occurred. And the timeline for that process is to be determined.
Okay, so then that goes back exactly to Sandy's question, which is, if we purchased it with green tax funds on the premise that it's going to be parkland, how can we now not make it parkland?
Well, that's a different discussion for venue tax, because you can purchase something with venue, as our attorneys have opined before. You can purchase something with venue and then turn around and sell it, and those monies go into the general fund. It's not a popular opinion. 2 attorneys have already opined on that opinion, and it's descripted in the venue tax in the code. The city has the ability to change its mind, and it could change its mind through interdepartmental transfers from the general fund. It could decide it's not going to do that. I mean, there's all kinds of legal things that could happen, and I'll let Barbara chime in, but the applicant in front of you doesn't want to wait for all of those things to happen. The current zoning is single family, and that is what is preventing their ability to move forward.
But again, the whole premise of this request for this variance is based on the proposition that that property is converting to parkland. I mean, everything we have in front of us is based on that premise. I'm hearing you saying that that premise is somehow not valid?
Sure, well, Barbara can opine, but one council can't tie another council. So the council who originally decided they wanted to buy that with parkland and green space made a decision. That does not bind a future council. A future council may decide it is more valuable to the city to sell that property and go through the process of handling that. And so this applicant does not want to wait through any of that. Barb, please chime in.
Yeah, let's have legal counsel.
Hello, that's me.
Go.
I'm Barbara Bulwer-Wells, and there is a process that you have to follow. Even if you have an absolute agreement that says this is what was intended to happen upon these things happening, what actually that translates to is that when these things happen, we will be going to a rezoning process. That has not been undertaken at this point, and it is uncertain as to when it will be undertaken. So, in order to continue to expedite, and sorry, I just took my mask off, in order to continue to allow the applicant to process the property as they need to, they have to have insurance that they aren't going to have a need to have the buffer on the side that abuts what is currently zoned as residential. So they are asking for this to be continued forward. We did have a very thorough discussion this morning with the counsel for the applicant as well as internally about this process. And they, it was like, well, why don't you just wait till zoning occurs? And we don't know when that's going to happen. We can try and do the zoning at the earliest possible point, but we don't know when actually zoning is going to take place.
Question, if the zoning doesn't take place, then this is all irrelevant anyways.
If the zoning doesn't take place, it currently stays at as a residential.
And so in that case, can they still do what they want to do there?
Not without this variance.
Right.
And that's Sandy's point, which is everywhere throughout this presentation that they've given us, they've said, everywhere in this presentation that they've given us, they have referred back to the fact, well, it's just a matter of time until this is parkland. And so all we're doing is moving forward with our plan, and we need your help because it's zoned single-family residence, but it's going to be parkland anyway, so no harm, no foul. Well, now we're hearing from the city and from city council, council as in legal counsel, not as in city council, and that, well, there's no saying it's going to be parkland. So in fact, if it doesn't turn out to be parkland, then we are granting them a variance against a single-family residence currently zoned property that was inarticulately stated. And therefore, I'm going to have to, look at this with a different eye. So I'm dying to hear what the applicant has to say now.
Well, and I need to add too, I appreciate legal counsel and our city manager information on the zoning process, and that is not the issue for me. The issue is, in reading what we have been presented, it is presented as if there is a legal requirement for that property whatever happens, going through the process, that's fine, but that property was sold under a certain set of conditions, being that it convert to parkland. And I'm hearing from both of you that is in fact not necessarily true. I cannot imagine Ann Galt thinking that would not have happened.
I don't, and ma'am, I'm sorry, Sylvia, just let me step in here real quick. I don't want you to get a misimpression from me. I don't believe that the city and going through P&Z and the city council is not going to adhere to Ms. Galt's wishes and the wishes and the intentions that the city bought the property under in getting it into a parkland designation. I have no reason not to believe that that is the case. That was the intent, that was the expressed intent, and I don't believe that that was misleading. So I don't want there to be that misimpression from the city's standpoint. What I do believe is that the process has not occurred, and therefore it leaves them in either limbo at this time because they don't have a residential designation, a parkland designation in the residential area next door right now. So and again, this was all pieces of the puzzle that as we were moving along, there was certainly an understanding as to what would happen. As life does, it threw a curve in the middle of this, and it leaves you now with the decision to go ahead and go forward with this as it's presented, which is really no different than what it was a few days ago, which was it's the intent of the city to move forward with a rezoning from residential to parkland, but until that can occur, and there might be intervening things that happen that make that delayed, and so what the applicant is asking for is, in order for us to be able to move forward with our project, can you just go ahead and hear the variance request and hopefully grant it based upon everything else that we've known and we've been told as we've gone through this process?
Can I ask, I drew a little logic chart out of this. So let's go through the possibilities. Possibility one, we grant a variance. Goes to the city grants the change in zoning, and it all goes through.
Change in zoning has occurred. It is, the 6405 Brodie is zoned neighborhood commercial.
Okay, okay. So then the other, to get it to parkland,
Oh, you're talking about the Galt property,
Yeah, the
6401.
All property.
Okay.
yeah. So that's irrelevant, everything's good. In fact, the variance ends up at the end of that being irrelevant, right? Because
Yes,
the whole
it
thing went through
becomes-
the
it-
process.
Yes.
It doesn't become irrelevant because it's
No.
now attached to the property.
I understand that, but I'm saying in terms of doing what they wanted to do, the variance is relevant, it's attached to the property, but they got to do what they wanted to do, correct?
Correct.
The other bound is, we don't grant the variance, and there's options in between this, we don't grant the variance, the change doesn't occur by the city, and we end up where they can't do anything on the property, correct? I need to understand that. Do you see what I'm saying?
That would be the logic, from that perspective, yeah, that would be the
No.
logic.
They can still
They-
build on the property.
You
They're not
can't say
losing
they
everything.
not do anything on
No,
the
no,
property.
no, no, I understand, but they can't. They can't do their plan as presented. As their plan is presented, correct, yeah, they could still.
They can't do it now because the meeting with the city for the 2 special use permits is not even until March the 8th.
Right.
So we don't know what's going to happen at that meeting either.
Yeah.
I mean, unless somebody can tell me it's a fait accompli.
So, yes, and so again, it is the intention of the city to initiate the zoning change process. I think one of the reasons we mentioned the Parks and Open Space Plan, for a zoning change to occur, there's a hearing, a public hearing before the zoning commission, and then zoning commission makes a recommendation to the city council. Someone at that, meeting could bring up, well, aren't we going through a Parks and Open Space RFQ? Why don't we hold on to this? In 2016, the city brought, and I'm not, this is not apples to apples comparison. There's a city-owned property at 37 Lone Oak. There's a lot of things surrounding that property, but the city brought forward that to have a zoning change, and it was denied. Now that I'm not comparing the Galt property to the 37 Lone Oak. It's not apples to apples, but the city brought forward a zoning change, that and a few other properties, and the 37 Lone Oak zoning change was denied. It's different circumstances, but again, the applicant is already in the development process. They already have their conceptual site plan submitted, and as of right now, the site plan as submitted requires a variance since the Galt property is zoned single family. But yes, it is the intention of the city to rezone it, but it's not a guarantee that it's going to happen for a variety of factors.
I'm still playing with the logic. Okay, so one option is, we don't grant the variance, but as it goes down the road, the zoning allows then them to do it anyways, right? So we're now neighborhood commercial, single family, correct? If the zoning is changed to allow them, what's the term for the zoning? What would it have to be? Parkland. Yeah, parkland green space. If that doesn't happen, and we grant the variance, they can still do what they want to do. Is that correct or not? Do you see where I'm going with the
So if you
different
don't
branch?
grant the variance and the city rezones the Galt property, they can still do what they want to do as
Absolutely. I
presented
understand that one.
today.
So the next option is, we don't grant the variance and the city changes the zoning to parkland. Can they do whatever they want to do? Can they do this? My impression is yes.
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 Okay,
yeah.
okay. So that's That's just important to know as we go down the road. And then, obviously, if we grant a variance and the zoning changes, that's a no-brainer. The issue with that is we've granted a variance now on single-family for reduced buffers, correct? Yeah, okay. See where I was going on? Let's look at this like a logic tree so we know what the implications of these are as we go down the road. Richard.
Matt brought up 37 Lone Oak. I live across the street from 37 Lone Oak, and we've had fits with that property. I won't go into all that. The property was bought with green tax dollars, is my understanding. It was zoned single family at the time. It was going to be parkland or green space. It was never rezoned. That's been 10 years approximately. We've asked for that multiple times. And the reason two things we've been told, many things we've been told, but two that are pertinent. One is that the current council is not bound by what the previous council agreed to. So the fact that they agreed it was going to be parkland and not single family, and that the current council wants to keep it single family in part because some members would like the ability to sell that property. So Matt said it's not apples to apples. It's, I don't know, it's pretty close. It's similar. I'm hoping that's not what happens over there, but I just want to point out it happened down this street already.
So I wanted to point out to the intention to 37 Lone Oak and the issues you and the other residents have faced on, it was a trailhead, it wasn't going to be a trailhead, it wasn't supposed to be a trailhead. So that's some of the unknown to address, which is why this applicant says, these are the known facts today, and I'd like to work on the known facts today.
So the two reasons to have the variance, let me see if I've got this logic, is one, to do more stuff now, to begin moving the process down the road. The second reason for the variance is if the zoning doesn't get changed. Those are the two reasons.
Yes. Yes, and the applicant, when they came to the city with this project and presented to the zoning commission, and they've had multiple presentations, they were looking at the 2011 future land use map, which indicated the Galt property, the future land use map. So the city, in their comprehensive plan review back in 2010, and when the future land use map was finalized, and again, we haven't updated our FLUM since 2011, it showed the Galt property as parkland green space. So the future land use map and the intent, the future plan for the Galt property was a part of their presentation, and I believe their logic in asking, one of the reasons for asking for this variance. But again, it's still zoned single family, which is the issue.
Okay, so how about if we begin with the process? Applicant, you have the floor. I'm hacking my watch, 10 minutes.
Thank you. If we could turn to page 24, and thank you, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. I'm going to go off script just for a moment, just to put in the back of your mind, because I agree, Commissioner, I forgot who it was that said, it is what it is until it's changed, and right now it's single family. We are hopeful that it will change. One idea just to think about is maybe something like a conditional variance, that is something like at such time as the adjacent property triggering the setback is rezoned to parkland or green space, comma, the variance is of no further effect thereafter, as an idea. So that you don't have a variance necessarily on the books. Because it could be, the hardship exists now, whether the rezoning occurs 3 weeks from now or 20 years from now. The hardship exists regardless. So that's just an idea I had as I was sitting there listening to the conversation. But if I can go quickly to what we have at this is page 24, thank you, you're showing up on the screen. Yeah. I'm here today to request that the Board of Adjustment approve a variance from section 150.105 paragraph B1 of the Sunset Valley Land Development Code to reduce a landscape buffer from 100 feet down to 25 feet at 6405 Brodie Lane. As you may be aware, the applicants are proposing a botanical garden and eatery project at 6405 Brodie Lane, and as a part of that, need to seek several approvals and variances from the city. City Council took the first step toward this project by approving the rezoning, and this landscape buffer variance is the next step. I would also note, we presented and told the City Council, as we did the Planning Commission, do not support the change to neighborhood commercial if you're not going to support the special use permits, because we've gone to an extraordinary amount of work. So they have already previewed. I'm not saying that it's there or that it's a fait accompli. I don't even know. I'm not a good linguist, but I'm not saying it's a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. City Council has complete discretion over this. It would be tragic, of course, if it didn't occur. So you can see the property here on the screen. To the north of our property is a site that the city of Sunset Valley owns and has designated for a future park, which we've already discussed. This proposed future parkland is the core of our request today, and I'm going to discuss that more in a moment. To the west, behind our site, is a single-family lot owned by the Draker family. Then to the south, there are apartments, and across Brodie Lane is Lowe's. If we go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is the next step in our approval process for the Botanical Garden Cafe and Eatery, and we have worked extensively with the surrounding community over the course of several months to earn their support. As a result, most of our surrounding neighbors now publicly support this project, as you can see here. The purple site is our property, the blue sites are supportive properties, and the yellow is currently opposed. As you can see, the Draker household at 759 Oakdale is currently opposed, though I do want to emphasize that we have worked to try to incorporate their feedback into the project and have made meaningful concessions that City Council approved as a condition of rezoning. I'll also use this map to orient us toward the request you are considering today. To that end, I would direct your attention to two properties. The first is a Draker property at 759 Oakdale, bordering our property to the east. That's the yellow one. The second is the Galt lot at 6401 Brodie. That's the blue lot, borders our property to the north. Our request would fully maintain the complete 100-foot landscape buffer in relation to the yellow Draker lot, not seeking a buffer there. There would be no changes to the buffer with the Draker lot. Instead, our request is limited only to the blue Galt lot at 6401 Brodie. And I would also state we not only got a letter of support from Ms. Galt for the zoning previously, but as you know from what was circulated today, much to our sadness, Ms. Galt did pass away, and we received a supportive letter from her daughter. If we go to the next slide, here you can see how this would work in practice. The Draker lot is to the right, over to the right there, and you can see that we are maintaining the full 100-foot buffer with the Drakers, complete with large buffer trees and a 10-foot solid wooden fence. We've increased the height of the wooden fence, and we've moved the fence in 25 feet inside onto our own property line, inside of our property line, in response to a request from the Drakers. I'll also note real quick here, I see that the image unfortunately still says 8 feet solid wooden fence. That's because it was an older image when we filed it. The zoning and the special use, the zoning has asked us to make it 10 feet, and it will be 10 foot when we file and submit our plan. However, in order to make all this work, we need a variance to the buffer in relation to the Galt lot along the northern property line. This image shows that with a 25-foot buffer to the Galt lot instead of the full 100 feet that would otherwise occur, and that's what we have here. So why do we need this variance, and why is it justified? The answer is because of a discrepancy between the Galt's lot intended use and its zoning, which you've just spent time talking about. It had been used temporarily as a life estate, though the city has designated it for park, greenbelt, or conservation easement on the future land use map. Additionally, our understanding is that Sunset Valley purchased the Galt lot with money that was specifically dedicated for parkland uses, again, as you've already discussed. In other words, the Galt lot will become parkland at some point. Now, normally, Sunset Valley would zone city parkland for the P Parkland Zoning District. However, the property had been zoned for single family prior to being sold, and the zoning did not update with the sale. As a result, the Galt lot, which was purchased with parkland funding and is designated on the flume as parkland, still retains its outdated single-family zoning status. This outdated single-family zoning status then triggers a large 100-foot buffer along our entire northern boundary. This unique condition is causing a significant hardship that would single-handedly prevent the entire project you see before you today as drawn up there. To put that in perspective, a 100-foot buffer from the Galt lot alone would cover about 38% of the entire site. 38%. And if you take into account, in addition, the 100-foot buffer that we are going to honor from the Drakers, combined, that would be 45% of the entire site, a little bit less than half of the entire site. An impact of that magnitude isn't simply something you can design around. It would preclude this project and deprive the applicant of a reasonable use of the project and a substantial property right. Additionally, losing this project would also cost meaningful benefits that it offers to the community. One of the factors that this body considers is how a variance will affect health and safety and the orderly use of other land in the area, and whether it is in the public interest. And to that end, I would point out that, as discussed at length in our cover letter, our project is offering stormwater management, water quality facilities, neither of which would need to exist if this remained single-family or if single-family homes were built, tree plantings that go above and beyond what would otherwise be required on this property. In fact, the tree plantings are 16 times what would otherwise be required, and our detention produces a stormwater runoff rate that is 25% lower than under the site's existing conditions. That's an improvement over the site's current runoff rate. And our water quality facilities will also meet a higher standard than that required under the city codes. Each of these would meaningfully improve environmental and drainage outcomes for the surrounding area, but all of this is contingent upon the project you see before you today and the requested variances. I would also point out that we targeted our requested variance to the minimum needed to alleviate this hardship. Normally, there would be no required landscape buffer next to a city park, as we've already discussed. The Parkland P zoning district does not require any landscape buffer. So if this future parkland site were updated with parkland zoning, there would be no required buffer. However, we wanted to be targeted and narrow in our request, so we have only requested a variance to reduce it to the 25-foot necessary to address the hardship and allow a reasonable use. Now, I just threw a lot of information at you, so I'm going to recap very quickly. The applicants are proposing a botanical garden and cafe eatery at 6405, as you see here. The project has extensive community support, and City Council approved the needed zoning for the site earlier this year. I would also note the Zoning Commission also approved the special use permit, which, as noted by Commissioner, is going to be heard March 8th by the City Council. This variance is the next step to achieving the project. However, a discrepancy between the future use and the current zoning on an adjacent city-owned site has triggered a large 100-foot buffer across the entire length of our site, 38% of the site. This is causing a significant hardship that threatens a reasonable use of the property that's zoned neighborhood commercial and would preclude the entire project. If that adjacent site were zoned in accordance with the future use, which I believe the city attorney can talk about compliance with state law and being sure they're consistent, there would be no buffer and no variance would be needed. But because the city-owned site retains its outdated zoning, and we don't know whether that's going to be changed in 2 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years, a variance is currently needed to address this hardship and allow reasonable use of the property. The last thing I would mention is that earlier today, the city mentioned that they may consider rezoning the Galt lot in the future, as we've already discussed. We would fully support that effort. And again, as I mentioned, I think a compromise position protects the city, as I mentioned, something to the extent, and I would let your legal counsel advise, at such time as adjacent property. Well, anyways, I already gave you that conditional variance as an option.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, in our open session, we can call those who are in support. Do we have any folks that want to talk in support of the variance?
We have a bunch of people here who could speak if you had any questions, including the owners, Lacana Trubiana of Didi's, and we also have Reina Vasquez of Veracruz Tacos. We have the Trubianas as owners. We have lots of people who could speak if there's any questions, and we have engineers here as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that in the question side. Speaking in terms of the community in favor of the variance, do we have any? Do we have anyone speaking for the community against the variance? We have none. Seeing none, and since that, you won't need 5 minutes to rebut. So we'll close the open part of the hearing, and now we have the option for the board to ask questions of folks, city staff, and others.
I got a question. I've got a question. And maybe this is best for city staff. The 100-foot buffer that's there, my understanding is they can build the parking that right where your arrow is inside that buffer. That's not required. You can put parking inside that buffer area, or am I wrong? No parking inside the buffer?
Inside a landscape buffer?
Inside the buffer as it is right now, are they allowed to build parking inside that?
No. So, right, so if they, yeah, no, so no, parking cannot go into a landscape
Okay.
buffer.
And so I'm confusing that with side setbacks, where you can have parking in a setback.
Yes.
But this is a buffer, so it's different. That's what I
Correct.
wanted to clarify.
Correct.
Okay.
Richard,
And one of your conditions can be that it always remain free of anything other than landscaping.
Okay. Thank you.
so I was interested in the comments about deprivation of reasonable use. And what I heard was the reasonable use as the applicant considers this proposal. But would this be a deprivation of reasonable use if the applicant had not bought it with the expectation that the single family was going to be parkland? And is it a deprivation that is unreasonable? Because what we're talking about here in the Board of Adjustments is the variance as to the piece of property, not the proposed project. And as far as I'm concerned, the proposed project is as permanent a change as is the apparent decision to make that parkland. It hadn't happened, so it doesn't exist. So when we're talking about our variance, I want to be sure that we're all on the same page, that we're talking about this piece of land and not anything on this piece of land. And so what is the deprivation of reasonable use if it's not, if it continues in its, what is it? Commercial office? Neighborhood commercial, as opposed to this particular plan? That's a question.
Michael Whalen, Michael Whalen on behalf of the applicant. Thank you very much for that question. So I would start with the fact that because of both buffers, and the 100-foot buffer, by the way, it's a lightly drawn blue line, so you can see, I don't know, here Matt's going to use the pointer, I don't know if you see that light blue line, but that runs all the way down the 800 feet. So when you include that plus the Draker's 100 feet, that's 45%. And it's discretionary, obviously, what is reasonable use, but that is a meaningful deprivation of the use of the property. And I think in the context of the fact that the 100-foot buffer to the Galt property alone is 38%, that too, I think is meaningful in terms of use of the property. Even if this was, pretend like nothing's up there, when you look at where that blue line is, you can see how meaningful it is. Yeah. Yeah,
So-
and that is right. The driveway, I just realized that the driveway currently, that's a very, I totally forgot that. The driveway currently is within what is the 100-foot buffer. That is where the driveway currently is, and where people, everybody, I think, is expecting it to remain. And I think
But that driveway was under the previous zoning, correct? I mean, you've had this, you've asked for this to be rezoned, and it has been rezoned to neighborhood commercial.
it is zoned.
I
neighborhood.
understand
Yeah.
that. So what I'm saying is that when it was purchased for this purpose, it was a single-family residence, is that correct?
It was part of, well, it was part of an estate where the money for part of the estate is to go to Texas Women's Athletics as the largest signature.
So the driveway that was there and is there was a part of it was either grandfathered in under when you purchased it, or as a single-family residence, it was in an appropriate place, is that?
And I want to restate, my apology, we have not closed on the property yet. The owner is the estate. We won't close on the property unless we're able to execute on this plan. So the property is owned by the estate of Betty Grubbs, and the owners are here and can explain the exact mechanics, if you want, of the ownership right now. And that's the way most people develop property. You're not going to buy property unless you get the permit to build what you want to build
So
on.
the applicant is not the owner?
The authorization letter is in your packet.
Yeah.
On the estate of Betty Grubbs and Gary McIntosh, the executor of the estate, gave authorization to the Trubianas to apply for the zoning change and all of the other various.
On their behalf?
Yeah.
Okay.
Matt or Sylvia? Just to clarify, I know this is in here, but I'm not going to go look for it right now. If Ann Galt's property was parkland right now, and I don't know if it matters if it's parkland or green space or conservation area, those things may be three different rules, but if it was one of those, is there a 25-foot buffer required for that?
No.
So if it was parkland, they would be allowed to build right up to the edge of that red line.
Correct. And I did check. There is no, because it's P, G, and C, Parkland Green Space Conservation.
Right.
So there's no buffering requirements for those three districts from commercial. So the buffering, the 100-foot landscape buffer is single-family residential.
Okay, thank you.
Just going to open, you had somebody that wanted to speak?
Yeah, the civil engineer had a really important point, because I'm not as focused on heritage trees and trees as she is. She does a very good job of that. And it is another constraint. If it's 100 feet, the trees are a hardship that also, a good one, by the way, a very valuable hardship that exists. There are so many. We are trying to preserve and maximize tree preservation wherever you see, not the dark green, but maybe I'll let Blaine Stansberry, our civil engineer, talk about the tree protection and how that's impinging where we can develop, which is another reason for the request for the buffer. I think that's
3 minutes.
Good evening, board members. My name is Blaine Stansberry. I'm the civil engineer for the project. If you were talking about the 38 to 45% reduction in the buildable site area because of the variances, that's really constraining a lot of open area where there are not heritage trees. So the tree protection requirements of the city, if we try to narrow what we have shown, narrow it down, then it's not going to work because we'd want to save the trees, and the tree protection is required. This site plan is taking out only 3 smaller trees. All the heritage trees, protected trees are all being protected and saved.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll make it brief. The issue here is we are under contract, and that contract, I'm sorry, we are under contract. That contract has a set time period. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Tom Tribiana, one of the applicants. I'm sorry about that. So that is the issue. The issue is timing. And so we've been at this process for 7 months. We've already shown the neighborhood. The city council is aware of our request for this variance. This site plan has been, the site plan that has been reviewed by everyone over the last 6-7 months. And we were told that this was the next step before we get the final approval of our special use permits from city council. We realized they could change their mind. That's supposed to happen on March 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the board for staff, the applicant? Okay. Wait to hear a motion.
Can we have discussion?
Can we have discussion? Yeah.
Let's do that.
Because we haven't discussed among ourselves, right?
Okay. Well, we can make the motion, then discuss it. We can discuss it.
No, I would like to have discussion before we have a motion. I'm with Richard.
My comment is, and my comment is, and that's why I asked the question about making sure what happens if it goes parkland. So we could say tonight that we allow a 25-foot buffer, and that would be locked in to that property for all time, I believe, whoever owns the property. We could deny that at some point in time. That property on the other side becomes parkland, and there is no reason for them to uphold the 25-foot buffer at that point, or any future folks to uphold that buffer. Or maybe there's a compromise position between 25 feet and 100 feet that I'm just tossing that out there. I mean, they are offering something. They're not just asking for something, they're offering something too.
I am quite upset that the presentation of this variance really presented itself as contingent upon the property, the Galt property next door, being zoned parkland. That was my understanding from everything that was read, that was presented, the letters in support. The project is lovely. You all have done a nice job of presenting it. It's certainly in harmony with Sunset Valley. I can't see, I appreciate that you've approached the Drakers and made concessions to the Drakers. I think that's very well done. I am just very, very concerned that everything that has been asked for has been predicated on that. And I'm also, and I'm going to use a word that's very strong, I am appalled that there is any possibility that Ann Galt's wishes would not be honored. Just let me finish, okay? We can hear from you, that's okay. I would like, and again, you've all done good jobs at answering our questions and paid attention. I would like to know the legal status of her having sold Ann Galt, having sold the property with the understanding that it would convert to parkland. And I certainly understand that one council does not bind another council, that one situation does not bind another situation. I understand and agree with that. But when someone grants the sale of their personal property under a certain set of conditions, and then we're hearing now, well, the city may change its mind. It may change its mind over on another piece of property for how many years? That's not acceptable. It is just not.
So, Commissioner Cox, I don't disagree, and I don't want you to believe that we have any intent as of today to do anything different. One of the things I said when I came on board is if we are trying to protect our parks and green space, they need to be considered parks, which takes a referendum. It takes a vote to do anything to sell it. In the current designation that they're at, it's questionable whether that is the case. Conservation land, those kinds of things have a different language in the code. A park is very specific. It takes a community to sell a park asset. My recommendation back then and my recommendation now in the Parks and Open Space Master Plan is if that is our intent and that's how we bought it, then it should darn well be zoned that way. So it cannot be disposed of without the entire collective making a decision.
And yet I am hearing from you all that intent is not equal to fact.
That is correct, and that is one of the reasons why the Parks and Open Space Master Plan is moving forward. One, to take an inventory that was prompted by 37 Lone Oak. That whole discussion was prompted by Commissioner Hayes and 37 Lone Oak. Take an inventory, what is the best use, so that we can dispel any of that discussion about this is more valuable as a viable piece of property for sale, or it has more value X, Y, Z. As I've said, in the time I've been here, we've had 2 attorney opinions opine on the venue tax. And that wasn't favorable. The residents who heard that, it was not favorable to them, just as it is not favorable to you tonight. I'm not telling you that's going to happen today, but it is a possibility, which is why in the future Parks and Open Space Master Plan, that has to be very clear. As well as, I don't know what the buffers are going to be. They may say they want, 0 buffers okay, 10 buffers okay. So in my opinion, if the Trivianas are offering 25 when it could potentially be 0, right, that is a give. But don't want you to think we have plans to sell tomorrow. But as Matt pointed out, the history to 37 Lone Oak, if that's any indicator.
Thank you.
So I'm Justin Trubiana, and I'm part of this project with my team. But to kind of answer, hearing your concern, I just want you to know that I've done a lot of outreach with not only the local neighborhood, but with council members and the mayor, and everyone is excited about not just our project in the Botanical Garden, but the idea of that becoming parkland that connects with the trails throughout Sunset Valley. So there's a vision and a hope here that we want as well. And there's a reason why the Galt family supports our project, because they are very adamant that they want that to be parkland. And if you look on the Open Town Board, her son wrote a comment on there supporting our project where he explicitly states that it was his mother's wishes for it to become parkland. And we've committed to them to honor that as well if the city honors it. So, we are totally in a line with that. So I just want you to know that, that's meaningful to us as well.
Thank you.
There you go.
Well, I have a couple of comments. One is I share your frustration, Sandy, because the predicate of this was that it's parkland. I also understand the legalities of it and that, it's not a done deal till it's a done deal. So there's a couple of things that have happened this evening that just basically make me more disappointed in the city than in any of the applicants or what they have done, but in the fact that, city staff, in one instance, failed to properly advise a resident, and then in other situations, over and over again, I keep seeing we are required, and when I first got on this board 20 plus years ago, we went through every single required finding. We made the applicant and the city go through every single required finding and present their evidence on that, and why the city was supporting them. And yet, again and again, today in particular, I'm seeing that it's really squishy on meeting these conditions, and yet we're supposed to sit up here and in order to make each of these findings, in order to support our decision, I'm finding what we're getting is not fact but hope. And as much as I think this is a lovely project, if it comes to fruition, I've been around a long time, and I see that people make promises about what they're going to do, and then they don't do it. And then because of the bifurcated the way the city works between the zoning commission and the city and the permits and the city council and the variances, that things don't always go the way things planned. So as far as I'm concerned, while this is a very lovely idea, I'm not sure I'm going to see it 10 years from now. So I really struggle with making a lot of decisions based on the what ifs. And it's a lot easier, to say with real clear meaning, this is a single-family residential property, and so is the one next door, and the requirements are X. Now, to Richard's point, which I think is a very good one, you are offering to forever time put on this piece of property a 25-foot buffer zone, landscape buffer zone along that northern edge. And I understand why we don't need that for parkland, because if it's parkland, it's already vegetative. But that is a good thing. So just looking at it from that reality, which is in the current reality, I am supportive. But I don't believe, like I said, that this botanical garden and eatery is still going to be here 10 years from now. And so all these lovely things that they're offering about water quality, et cetera, I think that's great. And I hope that it is here from 10 years from now, but I don't think it will be. And on top of that, I'm disappointed that these keep getting brought to us when it seems to me that they are not at all ripe for consideration.
I hear what you're saying about it may not be here 10 years from now, and we've got no guarantee. I mean, I know these people have good intentions. We've had lots of people come in here with good intentions and tell us exactly what they were going to do and then not go do it. They could take this buffer and this plot and flip the property before they even sell it. And I don't think that's the people's intention, but things change. Sometimes circumstances change, and people try to make money where they can. So that's one concern. One of the applicants, and I forgot your name, Jonathan, stated that it would be, they look forward to being able to connect to the city's trails. And that got me looking at the map, and I realized actually this property is not connected to city property at all right now. And what it also made me recognize is the property next door, Miss Galt's property, is basically landlocked from the rest of the city. So the only way to get into Miss Galt's property is to go down Brodie or to go into this facility. And I really question, is the city really going to put a park there? Are they going to make that green space, or what is the city going to do with that? I mean, I know what Ms. Galt wanted to do with it. That's real clear. And I believe the city should abide by that. But I'm looking at it, it's not a great place for a park. If it's just going to be raw land, I mean, every place is a great place for raw land. And that would be great for y'all's project. But from the city's perspective, who in the city is going to be able to go there? It's on the far corner of the city on a busy road. And it doesn't attach to the rest of the city property. And I think that's just one of the things that the city wants to look at is how do we make this all make sense? I mean, if I could pick I could swap that with another yellow property. There's a lot of better properties to match what the city has.
I'm sorry, Richard, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. I have another question. This may be a question for the staff. It is for the staff. If, given the fact that one council is not obligated by a prior council, and for whatever reason, given the fact the intent is to make that parkland, open space, conservation, whatever, but for some reason they do not, and instead they zone it neighborhood commercial, which is the zoning that this has already been approved for, my understanding. Then, if we have granted a 25-foot buffer along that edge, and the Galt property is, for whatever reason, zoned neighborhood commercial, does that 25-foot buffer stay?
I'll let Barbara comment, but if it's a condition of the variance, yes, the 25-foot buffer stays. Barbara?
Yes, it would stay. You can make a, I mean, that's the thing is you could make it conditioned upon ultimately being zoned parkland. I mean, you could, there's ways you could structure this to try and make it so that it conforms with what their desire is ultimately, but conditioned upon the zoning being granted ultimately. And so say it was that it would be conditioned upon, you would grant the variance if it's conditioned upon that parkland, that the Galt property becomes zoned parkland. You could condition it upon that the 25-foot buffer would remain if it was zoned neighborhood commercial. I mean, there's various ways that you could potentially grant what they've asked for is a grant of a variance from there being the buffer so that they would be able to have full use of the property in the manner that they have out there. And a lot of their entire plan is based upon the premise that, yes, there's going to be parkland and that sort of thing. So you could go along with that idea that you would maybe have a 0 buffer if it was granted parkland, or if it isn't, it has a 25-foot buffer.
Okay, thank you. But a conditional variance based on the Galt property being rezoned, would that not prohibit them from being able to proceed then? I mean, and here we've heard that 10 years down the road, something is still not rezoned. I think that would totally evacuate any chance they would have. I mean, is that correct?
I don't think so. I mean, first.
We're buying extensions right now, and so timing is the issue, right? I mean, because it would be real easy to say, just get it rezoned, and when it gets rezoned, we're not even before you, right? We're not even before you. The fact is, what we're hearing is no one can tell us how quickly that would happen. So the issue is timing. It's not like we own the land and we're sitting there with it. We obviously spend a lot of time and energy. We've got a lot of support for the project. So anyway, that's the issue. It's really the timing of it. Thank you.
Richard, you made a really good point. Thank you about discussing the isolated nature of that piece of property as parkland. Well, it's great because when you talk about the connection to the trail, if they put an 8-foot solid wood fence between the Galt property and this property, there's no connecting nobody to nothing.
I'm sorry. I can answer. We've actually agreed with, because of Mrs. Galt's desires while she was living, and we were working with Ted and Susan Burton, her children, there was a desire for us to have a connection subject to the city permission and a designated memorial information about Miss Gall as you entered into the parkland once it became available, all subject to and contingent upon city approval, of course, for that connection. I know there's been a lot of interest in that among other stakeholders, but I did want to make you aware that we had agreed to that.
So the plat, the drawing, the proposed site plan that you have submitted with the variance application is not accurate because it doesn't show this new thing?
No, so this was a letter, this was an agreement that we entered into with Mrs. Gall. It was done at the time when she was alive. Her passing was obviously sudden a week ago. This was submitted, this drawing actually was done probably more than 60 days ago.
Well,
while she
I
was still
understand that,
alive.
but what I'm saying is normally when we hear a variance, if we rely on this document, then we will very frequently, always, condition a variance upon the information provided. So if you want to amend this to show me where you might have some access, then I would like to know that before I make any decision.
Sure, and we just, two responses. One, we don't know where it'll be because it's subject to city approval, so I couldn't possibly tell you where, because the city
Okay.
has complete discretion on where they would like access to be, if any at all, right? They might not even want that access. So I couldn't possibly be able to tell you until the
Okay.
city told us where.
That's fine, thank you. No, I don't need any more comment on that.
Well, but he had asked her.
Yeah, because I want to explain. The 8-foot fence is not a condition. We have a condition that's in your packet that we have security fence around the property. The 8-foot was in working with Ann Galt, who had her home there, was living there. She had requested that we put the solid 8-foot wooden fence. So we would work with the city and figure out what made the most sense. But because Ann was living in that home, no longer the case, unfortunately and sadly. But our condition is that we will do a 10-foot fence back along the Draker, went from 6 to 8 to 10, and that we will have a security fence around the site.
Tell me what you define as security. What do you mean by security fence on the other side?
That was a request from the Drakers so that people couldn't just like hop over the fence
Is it like a
and come onto
wire
the site.
fence? I mean, what
Yeah,
is it?
It was not defined as, so for instance, at the front, there's actually bob wire that goes across it.
Okay.
So we would work with city staff through the development process to figure that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one thing I want to say, which is, when we have done these vegetation buffers before, we have typically had all the information about the type of fencing and everything else. And the reason that it is important is because, to me, if we're approving this with the idea that the potential landowner on the other side, be that the city as parkland or it becomes more neighborhood commercial, I mean, right now I'm starting to feel like can't rely on this. I mean, I can go with, and I really like Richard's point about we're getting a 25-foot buffer we wouldn't necessarily already have, and I like that. And I especially like it if it doesn't become parkland. But now I'm a little iffy about what I'm conditioning it on. Am I conditioning it on a barbed wire fence? Or am I conditioning it on an 8-foot wooden fence? And it's not up to the city if we're the ones approving it.
Yeah, actually on the diagram, it has a 8-foot solid wood fence.
Right.
So it's,
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But now he's saying it's not necessarily.
well,
But is that the 8-foot fence that backs up
committed.
to the Draker property?
no, the Draker's 12 or 10.
10 foot. Yeah.
Okay.
This site plan has not changed through 6 public meetings. This is what we're going to be building. and it is an 8-foot fence, and if you want to make it as a condition, we're fine. It's only to the extent that the city wanted to change or modify that we would be amicable to their request. But it is intended to be an 8-foot fence.
Okay, but your partner said that you wanted to connect to parkland. And so
There has been discussion with the mayor and the members of city council who said that would be part of their vision. So,
Commissioner, just so you know, that's not been a discussion with staff. So we've been working off this site plan. This is the site plan. This is what's turned into you. We recognize you make conditions based on the site plan. Mr. Whelan has made comments that this is the site plan, this is the site plan, so.
Okay, thanks.
And a question on conditions is, we would want to think about this, and I think in the past we have set conditions that are solely dependent on this particular application and does not follow the property if somebody makes another application in terms of those zoning changes and everything. So that, we could make that condition.
Oh, we could.
Yeah.
But we don't generally.
Yeah, I
They
think,
follow the land.
yeah. Way back sometime.
No.
Maybe, really?
No.
Okay, but we
All the
can't,
time.
So the other thing to consider is this use is only allowed by special permit. And so if they go away, the special use permit goes away.
I understand, but the variance does not go away. Yeah.
but we can condition the variance
Why would we do that?
because we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Right. But this is our opportunity to control what happens in
Oh,
the
so what I'm
future.
saying, so, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. You're back along with Richards to say, if we do put that in, then it's there forever, no matter what ends up. Okay,
Which is preferable to me. But
yeah, okay, I understand.
Susan brought up a point earlier that and this isn't the only time this has happened. Doesn't seem like, I know they've done a whole lot of work and they've tried to get everything together, but it doesn't seem like everything's really together. For instance, what is the buffer material? I mean, it's a buffer, it's just, we're not gonna build anything here. It's not necessarily a vegetative buffer, or is that,
Oh, it is.
it's those trees that you see, the little green circles.
so those are trees they're gonna plant that with the,
And the buffer is the fence.
Yeah, if you go down a few more pages, you'll see the types of trees that
Yeah, that's
I
what
saw
we have.
those back there, but it
Yeah.
wasn't,
So those are the types of trees right there that, we've offered to let the Drakers pick out trees that they think would work best. There's, some of those are evergreens as well, and those would be the species, they're native species that we would be selecting in the area.
so there's a lot of trees behind where you plan to have your buildings and very few behind the parking.
If you go back up, I thought you've got the fence there, but so there's trees right there in between the Galt property and the, if we go down to one more, well, next page, well, there it is.
Juniper trees aren't native.
So, and I'm just now, I'm sorry, looking at this again. So very few of these trees are existing according to this. Almost all these trees are trees you're planting?
Yeah, the dark,
Oh,
Yeah.
these guys are the existing that you can't hardly see. I got it.
Take a
Sorry
look at the
about
color.
that.
Did you get the color version? It's much easier.
It's kind of color.
Yeah.
I got it.
some of the things that you are seeing are based on the single-family zoning as well. So the commercial properties adjacent to single-family are required to screen the parking lot. And so that can either be done with berms and vegetation or solid fencing, which is why you're seeing a lot of the solid fencing there. As we get through, platting and the watershed development permit, maybe this property is rezoned, and that screening requirement isn't necessarily need to be so solid. So, so that could then inform the connection to the parkland at a later date. But I recognize that the variance right now, as you're talking about the fencing, other screening materials could be done instead of the fencing, as it is adjacent to what is now single-family.
So
It's
what I
this-
was saying is that we don't just say you get a 25-foot buffer instead of 100. We say you get a 25-foot buffer based on what you presented here, and if you vary from what you presented here, you're violating your variance. So our typical way of voting on this would be to say it's going to be that wooden fence, and it's going to be those trees, and it's going to be where you said they are. And so it isn't going to change whether it's parkland or not parkland. The only thing that's going to change is what happens on the other side of the fence.
That is correct. Further questions? Do we have a motion?
I'm not ready to make the motion, but I think where it seems like we should head, or where I could get comfortable, is a lot of conditions to make sure we get what we want when this is, no matter what happens. Because as I look at where that proposed parkland is, and I really think we ought to abide by Ms. Galt's wishes. I just don't see how that parkland fits the rest of the city. And I'm curious what the city's going to do with that.
I don't want to throw a fly in the ointment, and I'm very sympathetic to the notion of time is money and all that has gone into this. But with the information that I have been given today, I need more time to contemplate and think on this than, and therefore I am not prepared either to make a motion other than to table it as I suggested in the beginning. And we are having another meeting very soon, as far as I know, right? Didn't somebody ask me about the 23rd of the month? And I would like to take it up again so that I have time to ask more questions and think more about this, because this is a little different than it was presented, and that is in part, unfortunately, because of Mrs. Galt's death, and I'm very sorry about that. The question wouldn't have come up, but I really need to think about it, and at that time, we will have more information from the March 8th meeting, perhaps, that will be more informative. Not that I expect the city council to do anything differently, but I'm just not prepared.
I too, Richard, appreciate your perspective on the 25-foot buffer, and I think that's very, very, very important. I think that's a very important thing. I am, quite frankly, conflicted. I don't know. I wish this had been presented differently, even apart from Ms. Galt's death, again, sadly. But it is presented as it is, and I'm just not sure.
I think we all read the information we were given and thought we were dealing with a buffer next to parkland. And it was a done deal, so to speak, and we maybe should have known better.
Dealing with the buffer next to residential.
Yeah, if it's parkland, there's no.
Right, but assuming that property was becoming parkland. And that's why the 100-foot buffer was not required, because it was no longer single family.
That's what was presented to us. That's the way the language is presented to us, is that it is going to be parkland, and therefore, it's, basically you're just, adding trees. And now it's different, and maybe we should have realized that. Like Richard said, this isn't our first rodeo. We've done this a few times. But I do think the information I've been given today just gives me a lot to think about. I will say I started out leaning kind of against it. Richard has kind of drawn me towards favor it, but I don't want to just jump the gun. I want to understand this. I want to talk to whomever they've been talking to at the city about this parkland and this trail and these fences. Because if I'm going to make a decision that is not based on this picture, then I need to know what picture I am basing it on. And if it's just, if the expectation was that we were just going to say it's a 25-foot buffer and we have no interest in how that looks, that's just not the way this is done. So I'm just not ready, and sadly, I have to say this, you got to have 4 votes. There's only 4 of us. I'm not prepared to vote. I hear that others are not prepared to vote, and I'm sorry to make you wait, but I just need more time.
I would also like to reassure the applicants, if we table, you do not have to refile. You do not have to go through this process again. You're going to be appearing before the council on the 8th anyway. So this is basically a 2-week delay, 2 to 3 weeks.
23rd.
So we don't want to make this more complex for you. Again, the project's lovely. That's not the issue. It's just how it has been presented that is causing us some angst.
We don't want to vote against it, because if we vote against it tonight,
That's not good.
that's not a good thing at all. It's much better to table it than to vote against it.
And I just want to reassure the board that it is still the city, and in acting for the city officials, it is still the intention of the city, based on the comprehensive plan as it is now, the future land use map as it is now. It is still the intention for this property, for the Galt property, to be green space. But it's not a sure thing. So again, I just want the board to be sure. It's not that city staff is saying, oh, wait, well, no, that's still the intention. That would still be staff's recommendation, for a zoning change, would be, based on all of these things, based on that it was bought with green tax, based on the Galt family wishes. But it's just, now we're faced with this circumstance. So
Matt, not really related to that.
the staff presentation hasn't changed. So.
They stated that they had a lot of comments in favor of this. Normally, don't we get those comments? Do we have those in our packet this time?
Well, so those were, they were, so there's lots of comments that I can forward to you. I thought I did, so apologies if I didn't. There was a canceled meeting in December 15th. There were quite a few open town hall comments for that meeting. Then the zoning meeting actually happened on January 26th, so there's comments for that. And then there's, I believe, 1 or 2 more comments for the February 1st meeting. So I can send you all of those comments. But again, those aren't relevant to the variance.
Those are in favor of the project,
project.
not the variance.
Yeah.
Not the variance.
Yeah, so we received no,
Gotcha.
we received
I've
no
seen
comments.
those.
You've seen those, okay, good.
I've seen
Yeah, we
those.
received, just so we're aware, we've received no comments opposed or in favor of this specific variance.
I
for
understand.
this-
I've
for this
seen the
evening.
comments
Okay.
about the project.
Good. Oh, that's right, well, yeah, other than the goal. Yeah. Which one? No.
So again, do we have a motion from the board?
I move to table this until our 23rd meeting,
Do I have a
or our
second?
next available meeting.
Yeah, the next scheduled is the 23rd. Yes.
I'll second.
Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're tabled to the 23rd. And I close the meeting. Oh, wait a minute, we want to talk about the procedure thing at the end. That's right. Let me get back to the agenda here. Oh, sure. Okay, I got too many papers here. Yep, here's the agenda. So we got public hearing.
So it's a very, last few pages of the packet.
Yeah. So the possible approval of the amended Board of Adjustment processes document. And we had some questions raised on executive session for legal purposes.
We're allowed to have executive
Yeah, I know,
session.
but the question was raised.
So
And-
what
and we're
is that?
allowed
We
to have
don't
one.
have it in here?
Yeah, we do have it in there.
So what's the question?
It was a question asked of me,
Oh,
so it is in there, right there.
oh, yeah.
So I believe Vice Chair, you raised it at our September 15th meeting, or someone on the board raised it in discussion of this document regarding executive session.
No, I understand, but are you just saying that you wanted a statement in there? Is that what this says, board
No,
questions?
all this is actually taken out of the previous one. And that part is literally worded the same way. Saying the board may also, just stating a fact.
Okay, all right,
That's all.
okay.
Was there, as you went through this, was there anything else? And we can change this at will. If we figure out something we want to change in it, we can certainly do that.
Are you, I'm sorry, Tom, are you on the Board of Adjustment process?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So we did have and I appreciate Sandy saying chair instead of getting all this other stuff. That was very good, and I wish I had thought of it. But I think the process is pretty clear in here. And the part that was more important to me to be articulated was the question of disqualification or recusal. That is, and I don't know if you all were at one meeting where that was an issue and it was not disclosed.
Right, I remember.
Yeah, and that's not going to happen again.
I agree. Yeah, we had a big, long discussion about it.
Yeah,
So-
no kidding.
Staff has a question for the board and specifically for the vice chair that, as I've, in the past few years, taken a role of really administrative, assistant to the board in preparing the packets. In looking at previous packets, a lot of times the staff recommendation was, just simply, as it states in the code that the burden of proof is on the applicant, and then the board reviews those findings. If you would like staff, so I'm just, I'm kind of, learning and looking at previous, Board of Adjustment packets as I'm preparing the packet. If you would like staff to, opine on all of the findings, let us know if that's something you'd like us to do.
So, I'm gonna get his name wrong. This is embarrassing. Was it Clay? Okay. For 2 years, I was on zoning instead of the Board of Adjustments in all my 23 years here. For 2 years, I was on zoning instead of Board of Adjustments. And sometime during that period, the city staff went from presenting their findings on the application for us to consider to just letting the applicant present them. And even when that happened, the applicant went through each one and talked about it. And then all of a sudden that just kind of disappeared, and it really disappeared after, and then when I came back, I asked for it again, and it came back again, but now it's disappeared again. And I find it quite disappointing because I feel like, first of all, the applicant doesn't get the kind of guidance that they need in presenting their response, or otherwise they wouldn't do things right in the face of language that says pecuniary hardship alone is not deemed hardship, and then all they say is cost. And yet y'all let that fly and come through to us. And to me, you're the gate. You're the ones who say this isn't ripe, this isn't ready. You have to present something that they can make a finding on. And so I would like to see that the applicant makes their case, and that y'all either tell them, yes, this is going to fly, or no, it's not going to fly, and because otherwise we're allegedly making findings that I honestly, if I had to articulate what it was, I'd have a really tough time based on what they're presenting alone.
Well, I think that's the point. If the applicant presentation is unclear or, to be honest, kind of specious, misleading and things, then that's our choice to say no.
Well, but then we find a situation like today Then we find a situation like today where 11 Sunset Trail, quite frankly, got poor service. I mean, I think that we should have been on top of that as far as permitting. And, you know, I expressed to you just personally before the meeting that it's very frustrating to me to come in here time and time and time again and be granting a variance for something that's already done. And, you know, and then we come along and we get criticized because why are you always granting variances? Well, because people are always violating the code and then coming into us hat in hand, and we have to live next door to them. And quite frankly, as a lawyer, I can tell you that there's plenty of cases where the court doesn't care if you have to tear down the fence. You built it wrong, tear it down. Okay, but we're neighbors. And I don't want to say to the lady, I'm sorry, you can't have your shed there. Go stick it in the middle of the backyard, because that's the way it goes. Whereas had she gotten better guidance, maybe we would have had a different situation, never seen a variance at all. I don't know. I would, like I said previously when we were talking about it, when we get new citizens, and quite frankly, we're not that big, and really we don't get new citizens very often. I mean, it's rare that anybody gives up their house in Sunset Valley. It shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that hard for us as a city to go over there and say, welcome, you can't do this, you can't do that. Oh, and here's a basket.
Call us if you have a question. Just call
So if I may, unfortunately, on the 23rd, you are going to hear from a brand new resident who the plan reviewer just missed it. Fortunately, it's not built, but unfortunately, it was missed by our third-party plan review. So let's call that. But where I come from, the standard to be a Board of Adjustment case is it's not a self-inflicted hardship, right? Self-inflicted is you permitted, I mean, you built it without a permit, or you yourself wanted bigger because you need bigger, better, faster, whatever one of those things are. I asked that when I first came here on how does this even meet the board standard to hear the case? And they said, that's what we do here. And I went, okay, if that's what we do here, that's what we do here. So if
I'm
you're
not sure who told you that.
if you are, and I think we had this conversation outside, because I said, how do we hear about somebody wanting an accessory structure, a guest house, that is bigger than what the code allows? That's a self-inflicted hardship because it doesn't need to be bigger than the code allows, right? Those things, where I come from, would have never been brought to the board because it doesn't meet the findings. But again, the history, and we go back to the cases here, history shows you guys have heard those type of cases. So if we're going to take a stance where staff goes back to commenting on the 10 or 11 findings, I hear you. We will absolutely do that. Heard you. Check.
Susan, thank you. I appreciate your comments and what you've said, and I agree. We, in the past, have really followed those findings. The findings serve the purpose of, sorry. You move it and it goes off. The findings serve the purpose of guiding the applicant. And to me, it seems like that if the applicant had some staff assistance and said, this is the criteria, this is what has to happen in order for you to have a valid variance, then the applicant would know what our expectations are. I don't think you can just hand those 10 criteria to an average person and expect them to understand them. They're not, I mean, people just don't experience that very often. So I would like to see the 10 criteria followed. And I think it would just be more helpful if you could just spend a little more input or time with an applicant and sort of help them understand what those criteria are and why they have to be met. And I just think that would help.
How they
help some-
potentially meet or don't meet.
Yeah, and we talked about this ahead of time too, and my frustration with the self-inflicted ones, and the good news is there's been ones, and you will remember this property, that still, they just went and did something in a setback, and then through an inspection of the property, came up this, and we did not allow it. But the point is that shouldn't even come asking for it when it's sitting in the setback.
Well, and Sandy, you make a very good point, but that works when they come to us planning to do something, and then they can sit down and say, well, in order to have a variance, you have to meet these things. When they come to us after the fact, they're trying to stick the stepsister's foot in Cinderella's shoe.
Understand. My last point is, the other part of this is the board is supposed to hear an opinion of the building official, right? In that case, that's me. There are some things in here that just fly absolutely in the face of current building code and current practice. Just absolutely. Those cases are almost comical and shouldn't be here, i.e. building in the floodplain as long as I give you a no rise letter. I mean, just some things that don't smell right, don't taste right, don't look right, and shouldn't be here. But I can't deny the applicant's due process. Once I made the decision that no, it makes no sense, but what I'm hearing you say is in your findings, you need to say it makes no sense.
Yes, I would like to hear you say, the applicant is presenting it this way, staff's concerns are this.
Perfect.
Not, no, hell no, but these are our concerns about this position, okay? They get their due process, but we get the benefit of your thoughts, or you, in fact, say to them, these are my concerns, and then they mitigate, okay? Like coming up with a 10-foot fence instead of an 8-foot fence. That has happened so many times in the years that I've been on this board, that with the help of staff discussion about concerns, they have come up with mitigating strategies that we could then very comfortably approve a variance on those conditions. And that's what I would like to hear.
And that helps the applicant do a better job.
Tremendously.
I hear you loud and clear.
And in the past, it's been staff saying, we support this variance, you know, if they do this, we agree with this, or, you know, we've had them say, Clay say, look, we don't agree with this, but y'all do what you want to do, but we don't support it. And, you know, I know that puts a little extra work and pressure on you guys, but it really does help the applicant because it lets them know what to expect, that, hey, these people are rough, you know.
Yeah,
you're gonna
no,
have to-
no, we hear you. The applicant that I'm working with on the 23rd, I did just that. I gave a draft report. I said, these are my responses to the 11 findings. I need your responses. And then we're, you know, how does it have to be right there? Can you move it? Can it be this? Can it be that? So by the time it gets to you, we've hopefully run the traps and not put you in the awkward position of do with it what you may. Okay.
My problem with the second was really this question, the logic trail, going through and saying, no, you know, if you make these, and then I got to the point where I said the variance is irrelevant. In the big picture of life, it's irrelevant.
Well,
except for their argument about timing. If there's some, and Richard's comment about that 25-foot setback being there forever.
The other issue is as the master plan goes through and the land development goes through, I don't know what the setback requirements are going to be from a commercial to parks and green space. We might have the committee recommend or the consultant recommend that buffer be 50 feet. I don't know what that's going to be, and that's the unknown when we have the land development code and the parks and master plan out right now. The parks and master plan we just awarded, so it's going to go through the public process. The land development code will, it's set for March the 8th for council approval to let it out. So
take years to resolve all that. It will. I mean, we won't get through all that to really decide how we're gonna use our parkland and whether we ought to sell some parkland to reinvest somewhere else. That will be maybe 2 years, but it won't be 6 months.
I'm glad you chimed in on the 37 Lone Oak.
I got it.
Well, and what I found interesting was I looked at the plant the same and talked about this green space is really an island.
Yeah, that became very concerning for me all of a sudden.
It is an island. So,
It's where it will be used by is the people who go to that restaurant
Yeah.
and the apartment complex next door.
Well, but, so that,
And let's stay on topic.
yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, we're on the processes.
Well, I do have a comment on processes and what comes to us. I'm afraid we're getting a situation, and we saw it with at least one person tonight, and Sylvia mentioned there's another one that's kind of got out of kilter. It seems like as small as our city is, I drive down the street, I see people building stuff. I have no idea whether they have a permit or not. The city could drive down the street once a week, maybe every 2 weeks, and you guys know what's permitted and not. I know, I guess it was 34 Lone Oak, built an accessory structure without a permit in the back of their property. I think you guys are aware of that. And then that property sold, it's still there, it's never been permitted, it's never been come before the Board of Variance. But it was built without a permit and then sold, and nothing ever changed. And the guy who bought it's a nice guy, he's my neighbor, I don't wanna, I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but there's all kinds of building going on in this city, and I have no idea what's permitted and what's not.
Is that the one that was like 1.7
Yes.
million? Actually, we did extensive research. They had permits for what was on the ground allegedly in the file next door.
well, I agree with you, Richard.
There's more property, there's more there than they got variances for. And-
We are on a complaint-driven basis with code enforcement. We absolutely are. Mostly it's neighbors turning in neighbors or a contractor who didn't get paid by a resident. That is right now right now I'm trying to resolve an electrician issue.
That's not a good way to do it.
No,
I don't
it's
think.
not. And the property, the value is so quick and people are, speculating. And, Matt and I this week had phone calls from people investigating death certificates because they're trying to hone in on the property. Or we have an investor who comes in and flips the property very quickly before we even know that it changed hands and got bought. So yes, we're struggling to keep up. Police department is helping us with code issues, but obviously.
I'm sure you have a list of every permitted job in the city somewhere that's ongoing, because I know.
We do. We actually just went to a new software that would, at some point in the very near future, allow anybody to look at the map and go, oh yeah, look, there's a permit right there for that one.
That would be useful.
It's not going to tell you how much they paid for their house, but it is going to tell you there's a permit. There's a roofing permit right there. There's a, whatever. And so as board members, when things come up or you see things that go, hey, that's going to come before me, but wait, I'm driving by it. It's already there. How did that happen? Process improvements. I'm trying to tie it back so Barbara doesn't kick us out.
Go.
I was looking at your procedure for hearing, and perhaps we can include, this is on page 33 of 35 in the packet that I'm looking at online. It's the second to the last page.
Paragraph? What's the paragraph?
It's the procedure for hearing, paragraph.
Okay, that's actually on our first page.
Okay. Where you go down about, let's see, it says the chair, the city staff, the chair,
The chair.
the chair,
The chair.
the applicant shall then have, okay, so you've already given an opportunity to the applicant to present the case. Perhaps since you want to have the city staff giving a counter or maybe not counter, but the city's position, would you want to add something in there as to process for the city? So it's delineated in here that the city is to give the city's position.
We've had a staff
Well,
presentation in the
We actually, under order of business, where it says supporting evidence for and against each application shall be presented to the board, that should maybe be clarified by saying city staff will provide.
We had a specific line item in the previous agenda
We
that
have.
said staff presentation. And I don't
Yeah,
know when
I
that
mean,
went
that's
away.
how, so, Tom and I, sorry if we didn't coordinate. So that is, I was kind of expecting to give a staff presentation tonight. So I'm thinking, with zoning, that's how I always do it. You know, the zoning, they open the public hearing and then immediately begin with staff presentation. And then we go to the applicant,
So Barbara, do you think that that should be under see, it says city staff shall provide the board with an overview of the application at the start. And so you think we should there take that sentence that says supporting evidence for and against? Does that really belong under order of business, or does that really belong under the procedure for hearing? Should we scratch that sentence altogether and say city staff shall present its findings or its that's how they used to say it. They used to say their recommendations on the findings. Is that what you think?
I think you certainly, what you're asking for is actually the city's recommendations, and whether, I mean, if what I'm understanding you've had in the past, where you've had past people say, well, we don't support this, that would be their recommendation. I do think that they need to that city staff needs to be given an opportunity for overview. And that might be something very simple as has, somewhat been here, that they just kind of, this is a property that, and then, you kind of set the stage from the city's standpoint as to, this property lies here, it's presently zoned this, property on each side is zoned this, and this is what the variance request is for.
And I agree, we can just expand. I really think that needs to be under procedure for hearing rather than under.
So can I make this recommendation, that we eliminate the last sentence under order of business?
Yeah, agreed.
And then under procedure for hearing, we revise, okay, so this is a question I have for both Barbara and the rest of the board. Should this be the point at which staff just provides an overview, then we hear from the applicant, we hear from opposition, blah, blah, and then we hear city staff's recommendations on the 11 points? Or should we say city staff shall provide the overview and its recommendations on the application at the start of the public hearing? I think we should hear from the applicant and opposing first, and then city staff, but I want to know what y'all think.
Susan, am I remembering correctly that in the previous time that you were referencing, we actually used to get, along with the packet of information, the written recommendation of the staff?
Yes, we did.
And that included the findings?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I was remembering that. No.
Okay, so I'm going to move that we amend these procedures to eliminate that last sentence under order of business on first page.
The last sentence or both? The city staff shall just.
Yes, we can do that. But those communications
Yeah,
aren't
that's right.
necessarily
Yeah.
related to
Yeah.
a variance. Okay, so then procedure for hearing on a variance would be city staff shall provide with an overview at the start of the hearing, then you'll call, then blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah,
Then
blah.
all the way down to the board shall continue and fails to.
Go over to the next page.
Okay,
Probably.
no, it's gonna have to be before that.
because these are the back and forth. This is the timing.
Right.
And then this is timing, so I would put it here.
So right above the last paragraph under that section, the time for presentation, we would there put
Yes.
city staff will present its, and I'll give this to you so you don't have to write it down, report and recommendations on the application and required findings. Does that work?
So, pardon me, where are you inserting that?
I think it should be,
Okay, so under the section entitled Procedure for Hearing,
Yes, ma'am.
the very last paragraph, between the paragraph, the last two paragraphs, the one that starts with presentations regarding,
Yes, ma'am.
and the one that starts with the time for presentation. So in between those two would be the city staff's presentation.
the question is, do we want that to come at the very end, after any back and forth between, not that end, but the end of here?
Well, yes, because I think that when we hear what they have to say, well, then that
Right.
might inform our questions.
Exactly. So this, in the way that is, it may make it look like there's an option for rebuttals and things. And we're not gonna have any rebuttals to the city staff.
Right, so you want it last now?
Last, yeah.
Okay, he's changed his mind.
I did.
He wants it last.
Do you see what I'm
I
saying
do
about?
see what you're saying.
Wait, the hearing's closed, no rebuttals. Okay, city staff, you tell us what you think.
Okay, I like that. So that's my motion. Do I have a second?
Second, since I agree with you.
Did we strike the one line, because I'm redlining this. Sylvia's taking notes, but I'm also redlining the actual Word document. Did we strike the supporting evidence, or did we leave it in the order of business?
We struck it.
We struck it?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so it's under order of business, it's the last line. And just to be
Yes.
clear, did the highlights in yellow, did that capture our
Yes,
discussion from the
it
15th?
did.
Okay, good.
And I like that logic, the hearing's closed. Okay, sports fans, we've heard everything. City staff, your turn.
Okay.
And the overview in the beginning should not then include any pros and cons in it. It should be just
Right,
a really.
it's just basically, this is the property,
Right.
this is the situation.
And that
Doesn't
does
fit.
not actually preclude our asking clarification questions
Correct.
of the city
Absolutely.
staff. I mean,
Yeah,
that's still there.
we can ask
so,
them, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I must offer, I don't really want the city necessarily interjecting itself opinion-wise. I mean, it's either found, they go through the 11 items and they found support, not support, whatever, on a recommendation.
Sure.
But not really, and therefore we recommend you
No.
deny.
No, it's
Yes.
on the findings.
No.
Thank you.
And we should have tons of samples of those reports.
I'm sure you do, and I'm sure if you don't, I probably do. But I just want to make sure it's very clear that we're not asking staff to give you an opinion.
No.
Just a litany of
Yes.
1 through
Correct.
11 and what you have to do, what the city has found with that 1 through 11.
Agreed,
Yes.
Okay.
perfect.
I think in the past, we've also heard from the city just to say, hey, we've worked with the applicant to mitigate this issue. We've looked at this. They do let us know that they've worked with them to try to make it work, or that they've been unable to make it work. I mean, I don't know that that's the same thing as an opinion or not, but
No, I think those are
It's-
factual statements.
yeah, it's good to hear.
I think that could be
What the
done
city's
even at the
done.
overview, that, city and staff, I've often heard it then, city and, the city staff have attempted to work with applicant on the following issues, and at least that gives you an idea on the things that
There has been maybe some give and take, but again, it's still on you.
Yeah, I
Sure,
don't think
sure.
that's necessary in the overview, because if they give us the full report, we'll have it before we start asking
will.
questions
Yeah.
and deliberating, so. Anyway, we do have
Yeah,
a motion.
we do it. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
Cool, I get to hit this. Yeah. We did know that. Can we leave these materials with you to be?